All right, today on Across the Globe channel, we have Dan Rodriguez, the man who does it all. Appreciate you coming here.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. The man who does it all. Okay. I'll
Yeah,
take it.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So I want to start with you have a really nice looking resume,
hmm
and you started pretty young. But what really got you excited about the entertainment industry, and what got you excited about specifically cinematography?
I've kind of taken many years to sort of realize that when I made the decision to get into filmmaking, I always tell people that I honestly can't remember the exact moment when I decided to do so. Coming out of high school, as much as I went to a quote unquote prep school that preps you for college, they never particularly inspired. Growing up, I was very interested in art and music. I was huge into drawing, well into high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then into high school, I sort of became very frustrated with you draw and you spend so much time, and ultimately you just have like a single image.
Right.
I just wanted to express more. Like I was like, just you have the one image, and I'm like, it's not enough. And ultimately, not feeling particularly motivated coming out of high school, I almost did electrical engineering.
Oh wow, that's so
Right,
different than
right.
what you're doing now. That's a completely different path. That's like
It's
an alternate universe
totally
kind of
just
Dan.
misguided. I think just because my family thought it was very tech savvy, more than what is really considered tech savvy.
Right.
And then I went to an open house actually at
Mm-hmm.
a institute, and the first question I asked was like, "Is there a lot of math in electrical engineering? Because I hate math." And they're like, "Well, it's like all but math. All it
Right,
is math." And
exactly.
I'm
That's
like,
like engineering
"Oh, well, this
101.
isn't for me then."
Right.
Ultimately settled on CUNY. I went to Hunter College. Another totally misguided decision. It's just strictly because I think I asked my mother. I was like, "What are good colleges?" I don't know. I just was not that guy that was like focused too much on college.
Right, right. So yeah,
And
what got you excited about Hunter College, or like what kind of led you down that
well,
path?
here's the thing. I just like, "What's a good college?" She's like, "Well, I used to go to Hunter a lot, and it was always great when I
Mm-hmm.
went there." And I went, "Okay, well, I guess Hunter it is." And it wasn't until
Right.
I was well into my first semester that I go to my mother and I go, "So how was it for you when you went to Hunter?" She's like, "Oh, I never went there. I just visited like a couple of times to see friends."
Right.
And I
That's
went,
funny.
"So why did I choose this school?"
Mm-hmm.
But I went, "All right." And the first course I ever took was a summer course. Like before the main semester, I did an intro to film class. I never really considered a career in it because I think coming out of high
Mm-hmm.
school, I was very introverted.
Okay.
And
Did that have a correlation between you watching a lot of movies or kind of becoming a movie
yeah, I
person?
suppose so. I was just always very into, yeah, I suppose a loner to a certain extent. I
Mm-hmm.
spend a lot of time watching television and film. And
Right, of
funny
course.
enough, I'll never forget being in fifth grade, hearing something in a television series and going to my teacher being like, "Oh, I watched this," and her reaction be like, "You watch too many movies and TV."
Right.
And obviously to this day still remember that. And I was like, "Well, guess what? You
Right.
know,
Exactly. Exactly.
jokes on you."
Yeah. Paid off. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then basically going through that,
Mm-hmm.
I did this intro to film class, and I guess I sort of just knew a lot more than other people. Like I knew more names and I knew more films that honestly thought I would.
Right.
And then slowly but surely, I was like, obviously being attracted more and more to this medium. Now seeing it on a higher level, now seeing it being appreciated as art. I also came across a quote by the great Akira Kurosawa,
Mm-hmm.
where he basically said like film is a marriage of the things I've always been interested in. I'm
Right.
paraphrasing, but it's been a marriage of all the things I've been interested in throughout my life, including music, art, painting, and
Mm-hmm.
I that clicked because I think in high school too I even considered a career in music because I got very into like guitar, and that was really my outlet. So it was
Mm-hmm.
like drawing and music. And
Right.
now here's now an art form where it's very much like painting. I get to paint with imagery
Mm-hmm.
and going beyond just a single still, which I wasn't huge into photography until I got into filmmaking,
Right.
because I learned how to appreciate the power of a single still and the power of multiple moving pictures, I suppose. And then marrying that with music and the art of editing, and suddenly I'm like, here's a great artistic outlet for me that I
Right.
could marry all the things I've sort of been interested in and never found a way to express until all the way in college.
Right. I think that's a really good way of putting it, actually, where you can combine all these other art forms into
Hmm.
one single thing, and
Yeah.
combine all your passions. And it's funny that you mentioned that the fifth grade antidote, because I was thinking too, when I was in college, I was like, man, I watched so many movies in high
Hmm.
school and college. I'm like, I have to do something in this
Right.
realm, kind of thing.
Right.
So no,
You're
that's funny.
Yeah, you're very much sort of led, whether through your peers or even having, I guess, the quote unquote wrong teachers,
Right.
um,
Mm-hmm.
not see that be something that should be celebrated, and not like
Right.
people who say like watching too much TV will spoil your brain. And I disagree. I mean, maybe there are like the quote unquote wrong things, but if you could find a way to take what you've loved
Mm-hmm.
and sort of channel it in a very expressive way, I
Yeah.
don't see what's wrong with that.
No, exactly. So this all kind of started, in high school a little bit, but then you take that one film class,
Hmm.
and then after that, is it like, okay, I'm gonna go full steam ahead and run with this, and
Yeah, I've come a
it'll be
long
hard.
way since
Mm-hmm.
than who I knew I was in high school. Mostly because I essentially had to sit myself down at some point and be like, if you really are making deciding to make a career out of this, you sort of have to change. Not in a bad way. Not saying I'm not being introverted was bad, but certainly knowing that you have to put yourself out there more. Yeah.
So when you were at Hunter College
Hmm.
and going through your film classes, did you take internships? What was that like? Extracurricular
Yeah, no,
activities?
I did. I did. At first, I was a bit unguided. I thought the school could help provide some, and they had certain things, but it was little too general. I don't know. I suppose I didn't
Mm-hmm.
wasn't too attracted to it, and then I just had to like do some homework. The first internship, really, um, also sort of like my first job ever, was actually at Silver Cup Studios. Because
Okay.
being from Queens, the minute you're going over that Queensboro Bridge, that's all you see: Silver Cup Studios, Silver Cup Studios,
Mm-hmm.
Silver Cup Studios.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you doing some research, you find out that they've shot so many like great series there.
Right.
Almost all of The Sopranos was shot at Silver Cup when they're not on location.
Mm-hmm.
So my first internship there was at Silver Cup Studios
Okay.
in their in-house grip and electric department.
So how did you get that though? So was that through Hunter College, or did you
Um,
just go in and
n-
walk in and apply like, hey, I want
I
a job?
literally, well, no, I did it online. Like
Got it.
I looked them up, and
Okay.
I think I found something about internships. I found just like an email, and I basically applied and said like, hey, listen, I'm interested if you
Mm-hmm.
guys offer internships. And I got an email saying like, well, the first thing that we want to mention is that we are a studio, not a production company. So like
Mm-hmm.
back then that didn't really click too much. I sort of got it, but I'm just like, I need an in somewhere. I need just to get a feel of this life.
Right.
So they basically said, if you're still interested, contact Neri Hester, who at the time I actually like stalled for like a couple months because I didn't know how to pronounce the name. Like,
Okay.
so I was just like, oh, I really hope I don't call and then totally botch this person's name.
Right.
And
That's.
then they go, that's not how you say my name.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind. And then I
Right.
go, there goes that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Until one day I just like felt so good that I like make the call.
Right.
And then I just like assumed I like compromised. I went, can I speak to Mr. Hester? And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, no, he's on lunch right now. Like, um,
I have the same worry. I.
right?
It's
Because you're
yeah,
like,
exactly. You don't want to be mean or
you
like
don't want to be mean. You want to
disrespectful. Yeah,
insult, and
exactly.
then they completely get turned off and don't want anything to
Mm-hmm.
do with you.
Right.
But can confidently say it's Nairi Hester, and he was my first boss ever, really.
Mm-hmm.
And he was great. He still works there, and it actually a few months ago I worked on uh, Katie Keene as a loader, and they shot a lot at Silver Cup. And the first day ever I worked on that show, during lunch I made a point to go back, be like, Nairi, it's really great to see you. I always told him
Right.
I was gonna come back, but like working.
Right. So for the people watching, can you explain like what a loader is,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also second is the difference between a studio and production company?
Okay, yeah. Um, Well, I guess if people don't already know, the internship I did there was sort of unrelated to camera because it was grip and electric. It was like
Mm-hmm.
stands, if mostly focused on well stands, um, lot of lights, like a lot of lights. Their whole basement is basically covered in lights and cables,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like stingers. I'm talking like giant,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a bundle of cables could weigh easily 50
Oh my
pounds. Like
gosh.
I would be spent by the end of the day, but it was great because I was working with great coworkers who were very respectful, very kind, always open to teaching, and
Mm-hmm.
like even when I went to visit, they still like immediately remember me, and
That's awesome.
it's great. But and obviously working as a cinematographer, knowing lighting, I really wish I ingested as much more while I was there to
Mm-hmm.
understand these lights than I did. I sort of got it just enough to know what they were referring to, but I didn't really know the function yet.
Mm-hmm.
Working off of that, because that's a very union lifestyle, which is when you think any big production, that is what they go by. Everyone has a sense of structure that has been established over however many decades of this industry existing. Be sort of general is there's a
Yeah.
hierarchy. So you have your
Gotcha.
director of photography, your
Mm-hmm.
cinematographer first, usually followed by your camera operators,
Okay.
and then from there you have your DITs, your digital image technicians, which sort of function on that same hierarchy, but they serve different roles.
Mm-hmm.
They are less hands on with camera, but they are equally as hands on because they are usually collaborating with the cinematographer to monitor the image. They literally have monitors and they have ways of manipulating the image, whether they could start creating looks on set to show, to be like, well, this is what happens when we manipulate the color temperature or do this or do that,
Mm-hmm.
and tell the cinematographer, listen, you're it's too overexposed or it's too underexposed. Like you don't have information in these shadows or the highlights are too bright.
Mm-hmm.
They are essentially like a wizard of the image. They very much
Right.
are there to support the whole production, but especially the cinematographer, should they ever have too much going on and just be the voice to be like, your windows are completely blown out. We don't have any information in there. You should be a little careful.
Mm-hmm.
So DIT camera operators and your first assistant camera or your first AC, and then they generally are in charge of the camera. They maintain it. They
Right.
keep the build going. Um, their main responsibility is really to pull focus and make sure your image is sharp and make sure your image is rolling. They're usually the ones in charge of hitting record. Then you have your second assistant, who usually is just supporting the first assistant. They're slating, they're
Mm-hmm.
keeping notes of every single shot, every change to the camera, any setting they have. Being a second AC is very much being it's a lot of logistics. You're keeping track of everything that is
Okay.
happening throughout the day, on
Mm-hmm.
top of also doing people's paperwork and keeping a very good track of whether people are getting their correct hours. And then from there, you have your loaders. It's sort of like an entry level position. It's always an all hands on deck situation, and you're always expected to just be available and willing to work. But your main responsibilities are to make sure everything is charged. You're running batteries throughout the day. That's really like always in the back of your head that every certain amount of time you're checking, because never do you want a situation. And the second AC is always going to be on top of that and make sure the camera isn't about to just die.
Right. That would be very bad.
Right. But generally, it's the loader's responsibility to speak up and be like, hey, we should swap batteries or we should replace it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you never turn off a camera, maybe during lunch and then at the end of the day, but throughout the day, you want to keep it running because everything is running off time code. And if the camera were to shut off, it's always like making sure the time code is rejammed and synced,
Mm-hmm.
which sometimes as a loader you're doing. It
Interesting.
varies.
Okay.
Everyone has different levels of hands-onness. So coming onto different shows and different projects, it's very much understanding what's the workflow.
For somebody starting out as a loader, how long would it take for them to go to a cinematographer?
Well,
Like, what's that path look like?
so
Or is it a
it's
path?
sort of interesting because it's a very difficult question to answer because
Mm-hmm.
the way really on like many things in life. Well,
Right.
I feel with anything creative in life, I think it's more about your experiences and where life brings you than very
I
much
agree.
following a
Mm-hmm.
set path.
Right, of
Because I
course.
think in a union atmosphere, generally you rise up the ranks, but rarely does a first AC aspire to be cinematographer. They could, and it's all in their right, but
Hmm.
generally no one ever like rises in the ranks in that way. Usually you would see a gaffer who is involved with lighting and that department
Hmm.
sometimes make the jump before like an AC or even a camera operator.
Because you're not really working for like a like a company per se, right?
No, I mean
So
you're
it's like how do you jump from level to level
right,
if
right.
there's no company
It's
like.
also comes down to like your own self interest. You know, I've
Hmm.
spoken to plenty of loaders, second ACs, who really don't have any interest in cinematography. Like they don't want to worry about lighting or anything.
Right, and
They
that's
go, the
fine.
most I want to do is be a camera operator
Hmm.
and make my make my money and support my family, which are
Right, which is fine. Yeah,
which is totally no, yeah,
yeah,
it's totally
yeah.
fine. You know,
Hmm.
if you don't want to light, I don't blame you. Lighting can be very frustrating.
Yeah. So okay, so this was like your first internship, you said. What was the next internship that you
Yeah.
had?
So from there, it's Silver Cup 2014 that went for a couple months. I think it
Hmm.
was 3 months that I spent there.
Okay.
And then from there, over the summer, having that under my belt, a friend reached out and she, from school,
Hmm.
actually, I don't know if it was through school or through a friend of ours. I think I met her like a party or something, birthday party. And she was like, "Do you want to be a summer TA at New York Film Academy?" And I think that was the first like proper job
Hmm.
because Silver Cup was unpaid, but again, that's wasn't bad whatsoever because I was getting credit and I had a great time and learned so much.
Right, of course.
Though I think nowadays any internship should be paid, but that's not knocking on them or any other
Hmm.
place. Silver Cup, I could totally vouch for. They're great. Any other place that offers unpaid internships, results may vary. That's
Hmm.
all I can really say.
Right, right.
And then from there, I worked as a summer TA, New York Film Academy. I became like the film guy because I was one of the few that really knew the RES back and forth.
So how was being a TA? What was that?
It was fun. I mean, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how to deal with other people, whether it's really excited students who really want to learn and you
Hmm.
want to be there and support them for how much they want to put in.
Right.
Because as a TA, you're really there to support the students and support what they're trying to accomplish, bringing your level of knowledge
Hmm.
and quote unquote expertise to help them execute it in a certain amount of time.
Of course.
And I
And
think that's the biggest lesson to learn coming from any film school is just knowing how to spend your time.
interesting, yeah. And so you did that,
Yeah.
and then you were a photographer too for a little bit at different film festivals, right? Or
Yeah,
Lincoln
yeah.
Center.
Well, I suppose to stay chronologically, I did
Okay.
an
Hmm.
internship following there at the end of 2014
Gotcha.
at Comedy Central from September to December. I did one PA job at the beginning of January, but that was it for that.
How was being a PA? Do you enjoy that or?
No, being a PA is awful. It's not awful. I know some people who like doing it, and I could see how they have a lot of fun. But
Hmm.
I didn't PA too much before I realized I didn't like it. Just because it is an opportunity to be there on set and to be among what you want to do, but with a job that's so general
Hmm.
and you're essentially at the mercy of a lot of people, you quickly can find yourself doing something you don't want to do for an entire day. I think the biggest thing about coming out of school or at least getting into this industry is I always say try to find out quickly what you're interested in
Hmm.
because it saves you a lot of time investing energy and time into something that ultimately you don't want to do.
Right.
So I'm glad the PA route I caught very early and went, I don't want to do this. Even
Hmm.
if it
That's
feels
important.
desperate, like I don't know what I want to do,
Right. But
it isn't always going to work in your favor. Maybe you befriend somebody at camera department who sees potential in you and sees your interests, and then they maybe bring you on. And I
hmm
say, great, because sometimes that is someone's path. I
Right.
know somebody who works as a loader now who he told me I started as a PA, you know, and I PA'd for a long time until I just spoke to the right person in camera who
Mm-hmm.
recommended me to so and then I worked here and then I met other people next and then I met him on a job and he's a loader now and I went great,
Right.
good for you.
Mm-hmm. You just really don't know where that relationships are going to lead you. I know a lot of people work on or want to direct their own short
Hmm.
films and whatnot. So during your time at school, um, did you work on any short films, and what things did you learn from doing that?
Yeah, no, I've worked on a lot of people's films, whether it's just being extra hand on set, setting up a light here
Uh
and
huh.
there. Usually I think naturally I gravitated to either grip or electric or camera. I also directed, yeah, and I think directing I like to say is the ultimate goal.
Okay.
I do cinematography now and I love it and I would love to keep working as one, but I think feel it in me that I want to be take it a step further and express myself in more regards. And I don't even want to say myself because
Mm-hmm.
it starts to sound too singular because ultimately people need to understand that it's always going to be a collaboration.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't know that about you actually. I always thought you wanted to be like the top was like cinematographer. That's like that. But
Well, I don't
it's
know.
it's nice
I
to
think
learn
I
that you
think
wanted
that's
to be a
why.
director.
Yeah, no,
That
I think that's why
it's
life is
important.
always like different. I don't know. It's sort of the different journeys that you go through. Like
Mm-hmm.
again, the like someone who could PA and then get where they want to, or somebody who just realizes they don't like it. So I love cinematography and I love working as a cinematographer.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also found out about myself that I take a long time when I direct.
Right.
So I know that if I'm going to direct, it has to be something that I'm willing to be working with for several months, if not years. I have a short that I still need to finish a proper sound mix,
Mm-hmm.
and we wrapped production in 2017. So
Okay. Wow. Right.
clearly,
Mm-hmm.
I can't bang them out as quickly as some people, and that's just something I need to understand about myself. And I suppose maybe if the budgets get bigger and I have more people to hire, and
Mm-hmm.
a big thing about filmmaking is I say it's less about a marathon, more like a relay race.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can shoot
That's
something,
yeah. That's a good way to look at it.
and we have friends that can shoot something and edit it themselves. I've learned the hard way that I can edit and I have edited before, but
Mm-hmm.
if it's a big thing that's invested a lot of time and I'm bringing a lot to it, I just can't bring myself to edit an entire thing I've directed because I think I bring too much to it. Like if it was a
Mm-hmm.
bad day on set or someone was you know, putting me in a bad mood, if I'm editing it,
Right.
I can't turn that off. And I kind of view that with that. I'm going, ugh, this person was so unpleasant that day, which
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be thinking about. But that's why it's nice to then get an editor
Mm-hmm.
who goes, I don't want to hear any of that. I'm
Right.
trying to
That's.
focus on the story.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that to yourself. And I
No,
go, yep, totally understood.
yeah. No, that's a good way to look at it.
And
Definitely.
they're only thinking performance,
Mm-hmm.
story, how does this cut together? And it's nice to then, after spending however long in a production, to then hand it off to someone who will bring fresh energy, like a relay. You hand that baton, and then they carry it further, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're just checking in
Right.
because you need to have that trust. You need to be able
Mm-hmm.
to trust an editor who is then going to bring a unique perspective to your project.
Mm-hmm.
That's why that expression, like there's three films you make: the one you write, the one you shoot, and the one you edit. Because
Mm-hmm.
it, you know, if you're
Right.
doing it right,
I
it
love
hopefully
that.
will always change.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew Heineman said this, great documentarian who's now moved into features. Somebody told him this. I can't remember who told him, so I can't give them credit. So he gets the credit here. If you ultimately make the film that you went in there to shoot, you weren't paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, that's great.
Right.
And it sort of reflects in feature films too. Like if you make it precisely how you've wanted it, then I don't know, perhaps there's just a certain level of collaboration that you weren't open to,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I feel like a script is usually just a starting off point
Yeah.
too, because you don't know how the actor's chemistry will be
Hmm.
or that day. So I
Right.
think you have to be flexible, definitely.
And there's so many levels to it. You have your casting directors. You have, I've learned to really appreciate casting. A good friend of mine works in casting, and then she directed a short film that I had the privilege of being cinematographer on,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing like how great casting benefited to that because
Mm-hmm.
she knows just how like what questions to ask, and that's I always told her like I'd love to collaborate with you on that level
Right.
because you have such an intuitive way of understanding people. And even on set, something wasn't feeling right. She knew the exercises to get them to open up. And I go, that
That's
was great. I
yeah.
even like she
That's
like
awesome.
walked off with them for like 3 minutes and came back, and they're completely different people,
Mm-hmm.
and brought it.
Wow.
And I was like, afterwards, I was like, what did you do? Like that was so interesting.
Did
Like
she tell you? Like, I'm
she did. No,
curious.
she
What did she
did. I mean,
say?
she basically said like it was because it was about like trust. It's apparently the exercise is like close your eyes and just feel like the person's face, understand like their the curves on their face or whatever. Like I don't know if I would say that to any of my actors because then they probably be like, okay, like
Right.
weird, but okay. It also comes down to the trust they had with her. Because I once acted in something in New
That's
York Film Academy. I was like in a student film.
okay.
They just come up to me and they're like, "Can you act?" And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, we need someone to act." I'm like, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And then they
Right.
hand me like a teddy bear and they're like, "This is your best friend. Like, can you be best friends with this thing?" And I go,
I want to see
"What?"
this film.
It exists somewhere. I don't know.
I'm curious.
I
I
don't
gotta
know where
reach
it
out to this
exists.
guy.
Yeah, right. And I was like, yeah, fine. Yeah, I'll do it. It was really embarrassing for me, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess did the best I could.
Of course, yeah.
And then
But
I see the teacher one day on the elevator. I'm like, hey, how's it going, man? He's like, dude, I saw you in the short film. I was like, oh no, like don't tell me that.
how was that experience though? Because
Well,
that was
it was rough. I
uh huh.
mean, but ultimately the big takeaway was him saying like, no, dude, you were great. I'm like, yeah, you think so? He's like, here's the thing, dude. His words, not mine.
Okay.
All right.
All
So
right.
he
All right.
goes, he's like, here's the thing, man. You're such a likable guy. His words.
Mm-hmm. No, you are though. You are. You are.
But here's the thing. He says there's just something so inherently you, and then he says that about every actor. He's like, there's just something so inherently you that you can't shake, even if you're an actor, that comes through,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what sold it. And that really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, that's a great perspective
All right.
because everyone wants to think they can like get a performance out of someone you never think. Like that's always like the seductive thing. Like everyone thinks they'll find their Heath Ledger and the Joker, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone was like him. Like there's no way he could do it. But I think Nolan saw something in him that he knew would work,
Right.
and ultimately it did.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
casting, you know, being a big one. I don't even know where we started on this tangent. Here I am
No, I think it's
speaking
just
cinematography, not giving my insight as a director.
no.
So.
I think it's just going back to like advice that you've
Mhm.
learned on set. You know, throughout your time
Yeah.
working on short films in college and maybe
Yeah. Oh
after
yeah.
as
No.
well.
Well, I also feel I love directing, and something I've gotten from directing is seeing it from that perspective. Because when I direct, I sort of know I'm the one everyone is going to, and then going back to cinematography, I remind myself that I am now here to serve somebody, serve a story. Ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
I go to the director because they've been with the script longer than I have.
How is that for you and you know wearing multiple hats at different times?
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you shut one part out? Like how do you go from being the director for one day and then cinematographer the next? Like
It's easy. It's just a
mm-hmm.
matter of just knowing what you're there to support. Like if I'm there just as a
Right.
director, I know I have to serve the story. I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to do justice to the story, but also above anything, support my actors, make sure they are getting the direction they need, are feeling confident, not self-conscious in any way, and feel like they are properly directed because
Mm-hmm.
they might not always express if they don't feel like they're getting the information they need.
Right. Gotcha.
And you want to make sure that because then it'll come through in the performance. And you may or may not catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I turn on the cinematography hat, it's one also creating an environment. I know through my directing experience that you need to one don't bring ego to it. I feel one of the most things I'm critical about other DPs is when I feel they're putting themselves above the work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, insisting they shoot in this format or light it like this or no, this has to be the shot.
Right. how big has ego played a role on sets as well? Have you seen it just completely take a set off course,
Oh
or?
yeah, completely derail.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's a shame. It's unfortunate to see. It also makes things very uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable or you feel attacked or you feel there isn't a room for collaboration, you shut off,
Mm-hmm.
and then everything, it's like a domino effect. You can I somebody once said you could always be totally in the right in an argument, but the minute you start shouting, you've lost.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're totally in the right, I know
That's
I
great.
don't start yelling because then people are gonna get so turned off, and that's that. That's your shoot.
Mm-hmm.
It's dead in the water.
Right.
You could still have 2 more days to shoot, but unless you apologize, unless you really make it up for everybody, everyone's totally zoned out, checked out by then.
Yeah. Wow. No, I think that's good to definitely keep in
Yeah.
mind.
Again, collaboration. A collaboration shouldn't resort in somebody screaming at another person
Right.
or being abusive in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I totally agree.
also,
Yeah.
as much as I love filmmaking and I love doing this with my life, I also know that it's art and it affects people's lives. I think a very critical statement to say is we're not curing cancer here.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if that was the case or we're saving lives, then you could be more on edge. But, you have to find, even if you're completely stressed beyond all regard, be be kind.
Mm-hmm.
One of my biggest lessons that I learned at Silver Cup. It's a very general statement. As my boss, he's like, "Yo, Dan, just a big lesson. Don't be a dick.
Yeah.
No one
Don't be
wants
a
to deal with
dick.
that. No one wants to deal with that." And
Yeah.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to show up and the director's just,
An
or
asshole.
anybody is being a jerk to you?
Right.
That's just going to turn you off.
No, of course. So, kind of jumping forward a little bit.
Yeah.
So, you did these internships. You graduate college. That's fine. Um, I'm curious, and I don't really know anything about it. Just the union, and
Mm-hmm.
you got into the union, and what was that experience like for you? And what specific union did you go into as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah. Well, I suppose just the desire to work on bigger productions. Basically,
Okay.
essentially being like, this is what I've admired my whole life. And you sort of realize that anything on that degree is a union profession.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked at Panavision after transitioning from their sister company, Light Iron. My last internship ever was at Light Iron, which is a post production house, which again,
Mm.
different perspectives. And
Right.
it was great. All, working towards what I was getting out of
Mm-hmm.
cinematography, which was understanding the whole workflow, especially now in post and knowing where that was coming from.
Right.
And then going to Panavision, which was a rental house where I'm learning all about cameras and lenses and seeing union jobs, seeing the checkouts and seeing how much attention to detail they're putting into. And then I think the reason why I joined was just because I was also sort of like getting weary of doing non-union work. Obviously, I still do it, and depending on the job, I've become more selective of it because
Mm-hmm.
after a while, you become very sort of worn out with pursuing invoices. Net
Right.
30, net 60s, even. I did one company I've worked with where they do net 90s,
Oh wow,
and
that's a
imagine
long
that.
time.
You know, 2 months of 3 months of chasing a single paycheck.
Yeah.
It was a level of job security and
How long did
wanting
it?
to work. So the
Right.
the process
Yeah.
was,
What is the process
well, there's
like?
many processes. I joined Local 600, which is the camera department.
Okay.
So all the positions I mentioned earlier, that's Local 600, and there are many ways to get in. The simplest way is you take the test, which is what I did,
Mm-hmm.
and that was simple as calling the office, calling the hall as they call it, saying I'd like to take the test. They said, well, there's a wait list because their next test is already filled up. And you go, that's fine by me. I'd love to be put on the wait list. They said, well, we'll send you a form where they ask you for like 2 recommendations of union members. I knew a bunch, so I said so and so and so and so. They said,
Mm-hmm.
great. Next time there's an opening for the test, we'll contact you. So I think maybe 5 months later, no, maybe three.
Mm-hmm.
3 months later, they contact me saying, we have an opening. Do you want it? I say, absolutely. You pay the fee to take the tests and receive courses. So every weekend you're meeting with other people who are going to take it, and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of brush up on a lot of things. It's pretty hefty exam. But if you've done this long enough and you really know the ins and outs of cameras and responsibilities, it should be pretty simple.
Got it. Okay. So the full kind of timeline, it took like at least a year
At least a
from
year,
beginning to
yeah.
end.
And
Wow.
there are other
Okay.
ways to getting in. You could do 100 non-union days and then keep track of your stubs, your pay stubs,
Mm-hmm.
and call sheets, because then you'll ultimately show that, present that to them, and they go, "We feel you're proficiently experienced."
Mm-hmm.
Um, from there, that's one way. Another way is to get on a union job for at least 30 days,
Okay.
which is very difficult because you really need somebody to go to bat for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because more than likely they'll be like, well, why don't we have enough people already? Couldn't you just bring somebody that's already a member?
Right.
But that's one way. You do
Okay.
your 30 days, as they say. So 100 non union, 30 union. You could be working on a production that has a high enough budget that is non union, and then the set flips, as they call it, where they feel like it should be a union job. Maybe there are a lot of union members working on this non union production that they then flip,
Mm-hmm.
and then they approach you and they say, do you want to join? And then that's your opportunity to get in.
Got it. Okay.
So
Oh,
there's
that's
there's
really interesting.
a few outlets to getting in.
Mm-hmm.
I just took the test, and then they give you a year to think about it. And believe me, I took that whole year to think about it.
Right.
I didn't join until Halloween of 2019.
Why did it take you so long to think about it?
In that time I was leading into the test, I worked at another rental house. I worked at Area Rental, and that was another great experience. But I feel that by the time I was out of Panavision Area Rental, I just didn't feel I had enough contacts, enough people who, if I did join, I felt confident could maybe bring me onto a job.
Mm-hmm.
I had a few that I felt confident about,
Mm-hmm.
but let's just say it's quite the investment to become a full fledged member, and I didn't feel I really had the money to risk spending to keep paying to be allowed in and not have someone I could contact for work.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's the trickiest thing is making yourself known in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Because non-union is one world, and I'm sure if you get your name out there and you do well enough, that your name will circulate.
Right.
But it's a completely different beast in that world.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it
Gotcha.
almost feels like you're going back to square one. Because
After
I could
you
be a
got in the
first
union.
assistant on a non-union job, be an ace focus puller, but the minute I join, then I'm a loader, and I say, but I've been pulling focus, and then someone who's earned their spot to be a first assistant be like, and
Right.
and you go, and it's totally understandable
Mm-hmm.
because
You have to pay your dues almost, in a
very
sense.
much so. I can't stress that enough. That
Mm-hmm.
expression, pay your dues, rings very true with me
Mm-hmm.
because I get it. You shouldn't ever feel entitled to anything.
Right. So, you working on any jobs right now, and how has like Corona affected like the
Mhm.
work right now and in the entertainment industry
Um,
for you at
I
least
am.
for your
Well,
experience?
yeah. I mean, I started working in 20. Sorry, no. I started working in July. Um, the first couple of months I saw as the industry shut down, and how everything literally overnight stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And then those first couple of months where everything was very uncertain and scary, I understood not working. And luckily, the extra 600 in unemployment kind of kept us all at bay
Right.
and kept us somewhat comfortable. But coming around July, when we knew that was ending, we felt the beast reawakening.
Mm-hmm.
So originally, it started with just me and close friends that we could all vouch for each other and know that we weren't going to get sick being around other people. I mean, that's not to say we were on set without masks or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of like non-union stuff with friends, close personal projects here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I was even able to do a feature, an entire feature as a cinematographer.
Oh wow.
It, you know, pretty low budget, but we made it work, and I
Mm-hmm.
worked with some very close friends, collaborators, and it was
Great.
done. It was quite shocking that we were able to that happened. Leading into November, one of my close friends who I worked with reached out, and he said, "Do you want to come full time on a union show?" So I said, absolutely. He's like, it's work till December. And now feeling that things are getting scary, I like to put it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I've wanted to feel somewhat secure with work and also feel that I had the protection of a union in case.
Right. Anything else
And
happens
also
or
not just doing random little non-union things here and there and not going into production where I'm feeling uneasy because I don't know these people or if they're even taking proper COVID precautions.
mm-hmm.
And this show has been very good about it. I mean, we test and, you know, um, a lot of shows are suffering because of shutdowns. Like they get one and the way things are being handled. Not to say it's bad. Sometimes those positive people are purged from like, you know, the crew list, or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's the complete shutdown. And it's just sort of the world we live in. Like I can't really fault anyone's reactions or how they handle this. It's making the best of the situation.
Right.
Like
Mm-hmm.
obviously productions want to
Mm-hmm.
continue and a lot of us want to keep working,
Of
but it's
course.
also knowing when to stop if necessary.
Mm-hmm. So you're doing all these like this show right now, and I'm curious, you know, just for us,
Mm-hmm.
what's your like? Do you have a timeline that you're thinking about? Like, this is what I want to get done by X, or are you just kind of taking it day by day? Like, do you want to
Yeah.
move out to LA? Do you think New York is still the place to be?
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, where do you kind of see yourself going?
I think a lot of timelines I've set for myself kind of gone by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
I am someone that can get very like anxious of not feeling like I'm doing enough in a
Right.
certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of dislike my birthdays because it becomes very reflective of like what I've accomplished over a year. especially
That's
now
one
that
way to look at it, I
especially
guess.
now that I hit 27,
Okay.
I'm like, well, I'm not Hendrix, I'm not Jim Morrison. So if this is it for me, I don't feel too confident.
No, you're doing
um,
plenty. You're doing a lot, man.
no, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's one timeline I like because I've kind of noticed that 27, 28 is the hot spot, the sweet spot for like many directors I've admired making their first film.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say I don't know plenty who have made their first like in their 30s,
Right.
but I think that's the one I would like to stick with. Like obviously I'm gonna keep DPing, but I would love to maybe direct a
Mm-hmm.
feature of some kind within the year or 2 years.
Awesome.
Granted, I could find a story that I can see myself living with for months or years on end.
Right. That was my next question. Actually, I was like, do you have an idea of the genre or the story that you want to tell?
I think being Latino, I think
Mm-hmm.
slowly but surely, my family's always been very proud of our ethnicity and our roots. But I think being a second generation, it's sometimes hard to understand that. Like sometimes people ask me because I'm Colombian Venezuelan descent. They'd be
Mm-hmm.
like, "Have you ever visited?" And I say no, and they're like, "Oh, you should visit. It's beautiful." And I go, I know, but I just haven't gotten around to it. So maybe I
Right.
don't feel as connected as I would like to.
Mm-hmm.
But slowly but surely, I've at least coming to a realization with my identity of how important it is for me as a person. I've grown to love a lot of aspects of that culture, music especially. Like
Oh yeah, I
I'm
love
always
music.
gonna put. I
Yeah.
always say I put music first before anything. Like even
Mm-hmm.
when I'm directing something, I always try to find the soundtrack or a song that kind of encapsulates the emotion
Yeah.
because I feel everything is much easier from there once you have understand the emotion.
I went to Colombia 2 years ago, and I loved like the music there and the dancing. It
Yeah,
was so much
yeah, no,
fun. I
I
loved it.
bet.
I loved it.
I know. I really have to visit, but
Mm-hmm.
it's and then maybe it really set something off in me
Mm-hmm.
of a story I'd want to tell.
Awesome. Yeah.
Because I think
I
there
think
are a
that's
lot
great.
of great Latin stories that should be told, and not
Definitely.
always ones where. And this is where I something I very critical of.
Mm-hmm.
Not just telling stories of us being oppressed or prejudiced against. I think there's nothing wrong with celebrating what we consider,
Right. Exactly. To
you know,
celebrate,
just
your culture
celebrating
and
the culture
everything.
is just not thinking twice about it, making it feel very natural that this is make a film about this type of family or this and this is the culture they live and not
Mm-hmm.
making it a thing.
Yeah, I love that idea. No,
You
I
know,
think you
it,
should
it
definitely pursue
like
it.
oh, but we're celebrating the culture. Well, that's just our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
where someone says, "Oh, that's so exotic." I go, "It's such a problematic word."
Right.
It's like, "Oh, you're from so and so. It's so exotic." I go,
Right.
I don't know about that."
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, so obviously when the right story comes around,
Mm-hmm.
and then feeling engaged and energetic and excited to tell it in a way that I would want to tell it.
Mm-hmm. Do you plan on like writing it, or hiring somebody, or finding somebody to
I
write it?
maybe, I mean, I like writing. I'm a very slow writer. And sometimes it takes a lot for me to put it to paper. Like I almost run it through my mind to death. And even if it's comes down to like asking favors of people, it's like this better be a really good one if I'm willing to ask people to work for little or nothing.
Right.
So I'm always conscious of like, is this worthwhile? Is
Mm-hmm.
this worthwhile other people's time? Can I deliver something that people would be proud of?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
sometimes that really stops me from engaging in a lot of ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some people can not hesitate and ask someone to work for nothing.
Right.
I'm very conscious of that because I've been on that receiving end where people ask me to just work for nothing, and I did it a lot starting off.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, you know,
You
come
have
on,
bills.
man.
Yeah, exactly. You want money, and
Well,
I think that's
it's just
hard.
also like
And
respecting your time
right,
because sometimes you give people one and then they ask for two, three more.
right. They just try to take advantage of that almost.
Yeah, sometimes they're conscious of it, sometimes they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they mean well, but it's a
It's
lot.
hard.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I say starting off, don't hesitate to work on free things, but make sure it's almost worth your while.
Right. Like as long as you get something out of it or learn something out of the process,
At the
that's
very
fine.
least, I'd like to hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's very scary starting off, and you really
Mm-hmm.
will take any opportunity that's thrown at you. But I feel like that's why it's important to understand, or at least try to find what you're interested in. It'll help you be more focused in what you say yes to.
Mm-hmm.
Like if someone says you want a PA on my little short film, and then they ask you to like run out and buy food the entire day, you'll say yes, and maybe you'll feel like you're helping, but then ultimately you'll go home and be like, what did I take away from this?
Where does one start with cinematography? Like what's like the first thing you do? Like let's say I go to you, Dan. I have an
Mm.
idea for a short film. It's gonna be great.
Mm.
Like I want
Yeah.
you as my cinematographer. Where do you start?
So the big thing is one, understanding the script, understanding if you're a good match with the director and a good complement to the script. You never know if you'll have a director who would just kind of trust you 100%, which, and it's finding that balance. It's
Right.
really understanding because ultimately you're there to serve a director who's been with the film for however long, been with the
Mm-hmm.
script. Maybe they've been writing it or they've just been like developing it for months. So you're showing up knowing that I need to support this. Um,
Right. Do you read the scripts beforehand?
oh yeah,
Like, do
no,
you
I would
like?
never say yes to anything.
Okay.
I have a very small list of friends who I would say yes immediately because I
Mm-hmm.
know, I think through prior collaborations, that we will get along and that they know that I am the right fit for this.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
you know what I
So
mean?
yeah, no, I get that. So let's say you read the script, you like it, and
Yeah.
then you'll talk to the director, and then will you sit down and kind of think, like, do you go shot by shot? Like, how does that work, or do you kind of
Yeah.
just get the feeling for the scene, and then once you go there, then you say, okay, we can do this with the lighting, or do you do more homework in the beginning or when you're
Yeah,
there?
I'm huge on prep. Like
Okay.
I feel like if you have a location, I would like to see it.
Mm-hmm.
You could send me photos, but I really won't feel the space until I could feel it in person. Get a sense of, feel out the dimensions, take notes of that,
Right.
get an idea of where I could rig lighting if I need to, and
Mm-hmm.
then it's sitting down and being like, how much budget do we have to play with?
Right.
And then it's knowing, well, I can't really do this, do that. Like they say, I want a 360 shot. I'm like, well, we can't afford a steady cam or railing. What can we do? How can we adjust this to work within our limits?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm huge on working within limits because sometimes it brings out the most creativity. It's sort of like making it work. Like, how do we make it work while being true to what we're trying to accomplish here?
Right.
And it all comes down to different people's sensibilities. Some directors don't want a shot list. they don't want a storyboard. I don't mind doing either. I like being prepared as best I can because by being prepared, you always have something to fall back on. Because
Right.
you could show
That's
up and
smart.
be like, here's our shots, but then you go, you know what, doesn't quite feel right. What if we try it over here?
Mm-hmm.
And then we unanimously go, yeah, no, that's great. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. When you
And if
deal,
it
yeah.
doesn't, if you try it and we realize it doesn't work, at least we know we could go back to the shot we've discussed and drawn out and whatever.
So dealing with the directors
Mm-hmm.
that you've dealt with in the past, is it more collaborative on set, or is it usually like, okay, hey, this is what we're gonna do,
Mm-hmm.
or will you bring some of your own ideas to the shot as well and be like, what you just said, where you're like, let's try this?
Yeah,
Is that what happens most of the time, or is it like every now and then you're like, hey, I have this idea, maybe we could try this instead?
yeah. I've been fortunate to work with directors who want that collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I ever just showed up and they said, and I just felt like a hired gun, I don't think I'd have a good time, and I might just like walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, as much as money aside, money everything, like I just would like to go to bed every night feeling that we've done something great, and I feel like I've contributed.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I want to serve story, serve a director, but if it's just following orders and not being able to contribute or feel like I've brought something to the table, then I would won't be I won't feel great. And that's why I say like let's sort of discuss it in pre-production. Let's plan it out. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't like a director already has to deal with actors and a bunch of other departments.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd be like, well, actually, what if we do it like this? And then they're going like,
Right.
dude, you're bringing this up now. Like,
Yeah.
we've got an hour to film this before they kick us out.
Mm-hmm.
I go, I know, but like, we really should. And then I don't ever want to be that guy.
Right. Right. And I'm curious too because it sounds like there's a technical aspect of
Uh
the
huh.
job where you need to know cameras and lighting, but also you need to bring a creativity part and
Mm-hmm.
aspect as to the job as well.
Right.
And what kind of percentage do you think is more important? Is it 50-50, or is it more like, hey, you need to know your technicals because the director will be,
Mm.
the creative person on set,
Right.
or is there some sort of percentage like
I think the biggest skill is knowing how to delegate
mm,
because you can do it all, but it will take longer and it will stress you out more and maybe everything will suffer because of that.
mm-hmm,
So I think knowing how to delegate is the most important job because it's knowing how to trust your camera assistants to set up the camera where you need it.
mm-hmm,
Um, if whether or not you operate a camera is knowing how to communicate to the camera operator what the shot needs to be.
mm-hmm,
I've loved the quote David Fincher once heard from his father, where it says, "Know your craft; it'll never stop you from being a genius."
mm-hmm.
And I'm very big on just knowing as much as I can. Like I don't want to say I want a light sort of
I like
doing
that.
this. I'd be like I would
That's
want
good.
this specifically,
Mm-hmm.
but at least leave a level of creativity so that a gaffer could feel like they're not just following orders.
Right.
And
That's great.
sometimes they could hit you with something that you go, I never would have thought of that, or this is a much faster way to do it. Cinematography is often supported by your gaffer and your art director, your production designer, who brings so much. Like just adding like a lamp in the background and knowing that art put that there and you've collaborated with that department to know that's there and suddenly
Mm-hmm.
it brings so much and you're not just thinking just you bringing everything to it. It's all about a
Right.
collaboration,
Do you tell them like that up front? Like, hey, you guys, I'm all about. If you have any ideas, let me know.
Yeah.
How does that conversation work? Do you meet with the director
Mhm.
one on one and then go back to your team,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
kind of say this is how we're gonna map it out?
Yeah. Well, yeah, generally,
Mm-hmm.
as far as the cinematographer goes, my team is, or the team, you know, we're there to serve the story, not just me. They know,
Right.
well, they're reporting to me, I suppose, but like
Mm-hmm.
they understand it's a full collaboration
Right.
because I know it's camera and grip and electric coming to me, but I also know I need to respect and go to a production designer
Mm-hmm.
and an art director and speak to them as to what their thinking as far as furnishing, how they're going to decorate a set, how they're going to paint it, if anything, or what are they going to build,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can collaborate so that it benefits the both of us.
Right. Exactly.
Directors talking to them as well. It's not just going. I'm not channeling all that directly to them. They're going,
Mm-hmm.
well, the director wants the space to feel like this, and I go, okay, yeah, I see where they're going for,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe we could light it like this, and then I go, well, this is kind of tricky. You think you can build that into a set? You see like lights built into a set on like a sci-fi film. Like that's a very conscious collaboration between production design and cinematography. Because the cinematographer's like, I can't hide lights anywhere. Can we have like LED lights sticking out of the wall, like light panels? You know, you
Mm-hmm.
think like the Star Wars, any Empire, you always see like those lights just like
Mm-hmm.
coming out of the wall. That's
Yeah.
very much that was a collaboration between a production designer and cinematographer being like, well, this is a the Death Star base. I can't put stands anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We just have big panels of lights that light the whole thing. And they
Right.
okay, great.
Right. Do you also ever work with the actors or anybody
Mm,
specifically, or is it just closely with the director and then like the art director, the gaffers, what you were
yeah,
saying before? Like, do you ever kind of see the other side?
yeah. I mean, I always want to create a space where I can do what needs to be done, but also create an environment for actors.
Mm.
I, through my sensibilities and experience, like to light as much as the space, and then maybe add little, uh, shape the light a little bit more for the actor so that we know
Mm-hmm.
to look at them and not be distracted by the background or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I always am conscious of creating a space for them to exist in,
Right.
and then create an environment for them to exist in and feel comfortable in,
Right.
and not feel intimidated by a million stands and flags and
Mm-hmm.
you need to hit this mark because this is where the light is.
Right.
If there's a very specific look we're going for, then I think the director collaborates and communicates to the actors
Mm-hmm.
that we really need to land
Right.
on a mark.
Right. What do you use as inspiration?
Music is the big one.
Okay.
We could talk things to death, and that's fine. But
Mm-hmm.
if a director goes, just listen to this track and like vibe, vibe
Mm-hmm.
off it, or kind of understand the emotion I'm going for, then that does so much. You're letting the images sculpt around that. And also, music can communicate without words. So if you sort of understand it on both ends from a director, cinematographer perspective, then there's less that needs to be said.
Right.
You'd be like, well, this gives me a dark feeling. It's lit very dimly. And the director goes, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you present something to them, and then you
Right.
tweak from there because sometimes people have different definitions of what bright is or what dark is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's finding that common ground.
Nice. So, and who are your heroes? Like, who do you really
Mm-hmm.
look up to in regards to cinematography or even directing
Mm-hmm.
or anything else?
Well, anybody that knows me knows that as far as cinematography goes, Roger Deakins is the from day one. Really, was really the one that made me come to love cinematography.
Okay. For everybody out there, what movies did he do or
Oh, well.
short list?
So, sort of going backwards, he started his last film was 1917, and
Mm-hmm.
then Blade Runner 2049. I'm at this point I'm naming all like the big ones that people know.
Right.
Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, No Country for Old Men, True
Right.
Grit, Assassination of Jesse James,
Mm-hmm.
uh Lord, No Country for Old Men,
He's a good example.
Big
You know?
Lebowski.
Big Lebowski.
Big
I love
Lebowski, yeah,
that.
dude, Big Lebowski, and
Oh
you see, and
man.
you're like, how's one person doing such different
Yeah, it's so
looks?
cool. Yeah. I mean, it's a
I
great.
regurgitate a lot of what he says, and he would be the first one to say, "My way is not the right way. It's
Mm-hmm.
simply how I do it from my own sensibilities and how life has brought me." He came from a documentary uh,
Background.
background, so of course the way he approached lighting is very naturalistic, and sometimes he
Mm-hmm.
can have very defined looks like Blade Runner, but it's coming from a place where he's discussed it thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming from a inspirations in brutalist architecture or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have something like No Country for Old Men, where it's sort of like the lighting is built into the environment. It never feels artificial.
Right.
You can have somebody being chased through darkness by a truck, and that's what is sort of lighting the scene. You're not going, "Where's that backlight coming from?"
Mm-hmm.
or something artificial. You buy it. You
Right.
never like taken out of it.
Mm-hmm. When I watch movies, I get lost in the movie, like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
universe, right?
right.
But like coming from a cinematographer point of view, do you ever like, hey, like, do you ever stop and
Uh
like
huh.
get out of the universe and like, hey, why did they do that? Did it ever
Sometimes
ruin
I don't
movies for
like it.
you?
I don't like it. I don't like it.
Right.
It sometimes does happen.
Mm-hmm.
I generally try to just enjoy it. If it's a first time watch, especially, I always say like the first time watch, I want it to be strictly on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
Let it just wash over me and take it for what it is. And then if I revisit it, then I'll try to maybe I'll be more critical of like, especially if I really admire it, I want to understand it more. Be like, what is that? What lens do I think that is? Where's that lighting coming from?
Mm-hmm.
How's it accomplishing this and that? I always say like if I don't notice anything the first time, then job well done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's also somebody to say like anyone. He kind of feels like he fails when somebody says, "Oh, I love that shot," because then he says, "Well, then that's me calling attention to the work, and that's taking you
Mm.
out of the story."
Right.
And then he goes,
That's
"That
good.
then that's not really. I'm not doing what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my job."
Right. So after you watch a film and you really love it, do you start analyzing it, or have you just keep watching over it and over again, or?
A bit of both. Sometimes I feel
Mm-hmm.
I'm more interested in listening to interviews with the filmmaker to
Okay.
understand what they were thinking about. Maybe if
Got
they
it.
don't address it explicitly,
Mm-hmm.
but at least understand the thought process.
Okay.
Like even if they say something like I wanted to approach the films from a subjective point of view. That's goes so far because then suddenly I see the shot and or objective, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking like, oh, well, it's a very observational film,
Right.
and that's something with some of his work too. Like he goes, well, Barton Fink, we're seeing things from Barton's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Fargo, we're seeing that's another film he did. Fargo,
Yeah. Great film.
almost every Coen Brothers film. And then he's like, well, that one we approach it from a more observational perspective.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And it's that thought process that determines your decisions on the day.
Mm-hmm. So what's the bottom line? Like maybe for anyone out there
Mm-hmm.
who wants to be a cinematographer, who's a student, like what advice would you give them? Starting out, how to go about it, where to start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'd say don't obsess over the gear.
Mm-hmm.
It's very seductive for us to get caught up in the new cameras and the resolutions and the bits and all that. There is relatively cheap great cameras that you could buy for very little, but don't always feel like you need the newest thing. Um, for the most part, I still think 1080p can be enough. As much as 4K, 6K,
Mm-hmm.
8K is very seductive
Right.
if you have the hard drive space. But if anything, I'd say focus really on lighting, understanding emotion, and capturing a feeling. I think filmmaking is all feeling based.
Right.
It's all emotionally driven. You don't remember films for what happens. You remember them for how they make you feel.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
No, I totally agree with you.
even the films that some people are critical about, like blockbusters, people are very critical about. But I can't remember how many films got the emotional audience reaction that like Endgame got. Now, Endgame had like 20 plus films to work up to,
Mm-hmm.
but when, you had that big portal scene and everyone's like cheering and, I'm sure every filmmaker would love to have that reaction one day from one of their films. And
Mm-hmm.
that's purely on an emotional level.
Right. No.
And as far as cinematography is involved, you are just trying to enhance that level. You're not trying to call attention to yourself. You're trying to sell a feeling, really.
Right.
Because when you think about it, filmmaking is such an artificial construct. Actors are selling you on an emotion. They're selling you on what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Directors aiming towards that, and you are just there to assist. If somebody's giving really deep monologue, you want to enhance that. You don't want to then call attention by having like neon lighting that is flickering different colors, and suddenly you're hurting the scene because you're putting yourself above the work.
Right, exactly.
I'd
It's
say
just getting
that's
out
the big
there.
one. Is just understand how you can benefit a scene or enhance a scene
Mm-hmm.
while doing what is true to you, but not putting yourself above it.
Got it. No, I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to highlight for cinematography?
Go revisit the films you do and sort of understand what the lighting is doing,
Mm-hmm.
how the camera is, the perspective that it's trying to give.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you feel like you've kind of got a good feel of that, or just, something as simple as like an eye light, like I'm seeing you now and I see the light in your eye. So
Mm-hmm.
right on that, from there I go, where's the shadow landing? And then from
Mm-hmm.
there I go, well, that means the light is coming from over here.
Got it.
And doing
Yeah,
all that, once
that's.
you've kind of done the homework and try to understand a bit more what it's doing,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe try to find interviews with cinematographers you admire and
Mm-hmm.
see how they think and
Do you
what their perspective is.
right? Do you recommend going to film school or just getting out there and starting to direct or go on projects as a
Yeah.
cinematographer? Or do you say, go after you graduate,
Mm.
go to a film school for a year or two or whatever it may be?
Well, it I did film school. It definitely gave me a starting off point, but I'd say
Mm-hmm.
90% of what I've learned was through doing and from just research.
Mm-hmm.
The knowledge is out there, it's always easy for you to find, but that doesn't mean knowing everything and doing knowledge will put you put you where you want to be. Film school helps you to meet like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there are film clubs where people do that, and sometimes the results may vary. Essentially everyone's life is different.
Right. Of
There will
course.
always be different takeaways. You may come from a state where film school doesn't exist, and it feels almost helpless because you don't know anyone that wants to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Or you may come from a very vibrant city like New York, where filmmakers are very easy to come by, and then it's just sort of developing a network, be it through school. I always say school is a safe bet to get immersed
Mm-hmm.
because you have access to the gear, you have access to people who are on the same like-minded level as you, but perhaps you can't afford it, and you shouldn't be ashamed of that.
Right.
That's why I went to CUNY.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wasn't gonna put the pressure on my family going to SVA or NYU because I wasn't just gonna say, "Yeah, sorry, now you're now $200,000 in debt."
Right. Mm-hmm.
I have no no debt from CUNY because that was cheap in comparison, and now I
Mm-hmm.
could focus on my career without feeling the pressure of paying off loans or
Mm-hmm.
now I just feel the pressure of myself spending too much on my own gear.
Right. That's funny.
So it's almost like understand yourself, understand where you're coming from, and if you feel you can benefit from a film school of meeting like-minded people, or if you by chance hit it off with filmmakers that are
Mm-hmm.
bringing you on. I think that's the exciting thing about filmmakers, that you could come from different walks of life and make something happen without following a necessary path. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what separates us from doing careers like being a doctor, which you need to go to school for that because you're not
Right.
going to go operating on somebody because you've practiced on the weekends.
Right.
It's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But filmmaking, as much as it's it's a beast it's hard to tame. That's very much how life is, and that's how you should go about it, getting
Mm-hmm.
into that industry.
Yeah. No.
And then
Definitely.
it's ultimately it's about you. It's about understanding your sensibilities as a person and what you want to do and how
Mm-hmm.
you want to approach it. Is music videos something you want to do? Yes. All right, then do that. If you don't have interest in music videos, then don't feel obligated to work on them
Mm-hmm.
or to do them.
Right.
If you want to do documentaries, uh,
Follow your passion
follow.
almost. Right.
It's hard to figure out at first, but ultimately, like, you can't lie to yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
I think
No,
that's a
I
big one.
totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, I think the last question I want to
Yeah.
ask
Okay.
you
No.
is your three favorite movies.
All right.
Do you have a list,
Oh yeah.
or
Of
does it keep
course.
changing?
No, the first two are definitely locked in. The third one might fluctuate every now and then, but right now,
Mm,
first will forever be Lawrence of Arabia.
of course, that's a great one. That's one of my
Second
favorites.
will always be Eight and a Half
Okay.
by Fellini.
Okay.
Third would always be, well, not third fluctuates a bit, but right now I'm pretty set on it being The Apartment by
I gotta
Billy
check
Wilder.
those last two out, but definitely.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. Well,
So,
thank you so much for coming on my show. I really
uh-huh.
appreciate it.
Well, thank you,
And
John.
yeah, of course, anytime. But yeah, I think that's it.
That's it.
No,
Thank you
but
for watching,
yeah,
everybody.
thank you for
We hope you
watching.
enjoyed our time with us.
Yeah.